Hello, class. Today we will be going over the presentation titled Skeletal Muscle. Please find the corresponding notes and follow along. Review what skeletal muscle tissue is. First, skeletal muscle tissue is a type of muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle tissue is found in our muscles, such as our bicep brachii, or tricep brachii, or quadriceps, or hamstrings, etc. If we were to look at it underneath a microscope, we'll notice it's like parallel tubes, and it's also striated, alternating dark and light lines. The contraction the skeletal muscle tissue has is voluntary. Unlike cardiac and smooth muscle tissue, skeletal muscle tissue, we get to choose when it contracts. Now let's talk about the structure of a skeletal muscle. This is a muscle. In red, I know it's not really seen here, but in red here, this is indicating the muscle. This is, for example, let's say this is our bicep brachii. Inside our bicep brachii, this muscle, you'll notice there's different sections. If we pull one out, this is what it looks like. This section is called a fascicle. Now, if you look inside of that fascicle, the fascicle has little sections. If you pull out one section, this is called a muscle fiber. Then you notice this muscle fiber has multiple sections inside that. If we pull out one of those, that's called a myofibril. On that myofibril, there's things called actin and myosin. Those are myofilaments. Essentially, what I just want you to understand is that a muscle has multiple different layers. And we'll learn that our contraction actually occurs here at the myofilaments on the myofibril. Now continue with the skeletal muscle structure. Around our different sections of our muscle, we have connective tissue. So again, let's say this is the bone, this is the bicep brachii. First, we have something called an epimysium. The epimysium is found around the muscle belly. So around this muscle belly, there's this thin connective tissue called the epimysium. Epi, kind of think of like surface level, like an EpiPen. Myo, think of like muscle. So our muscle kind of has like this saran wrap around it to keep it in place. Then further in, we have a perimysium. The perimysium is found around each muscle fiber. So if we go inside the muscle, you'll notice we have multiple muscle fibers. Each of those fibers also has its own protective wrapping around it, and it's called a perimysium. Peri means around, myo is going to mean muscle. If we continue deeper into a muscle, we then have an endomysium. Endomysium is found around each myofibril. So again, inside this muscle fiber, notice there's more tubes, and those tubes are also wrapped around with clear connective tissue. Those are called endomysium. Endo means within, myo means muscle. So essentially, this connective tissue kind of keeps all sections of the muscle in place. Now, this is just an image that shows what we previously saw in a slightly different way, just so you understand how it all fits together in a muscle. So let's start here in the upper left. This is a skeletal muscle. Let's say this is your bicep brachii. The bicep brachii is wrapped with epimysium, that clear connective tissue to keep it nice and tight. Inside that skeletal muscle, see these different sections. Each one of those sections is called a muscle fascicle. The muscle fascicle is wrapped with a perimysium so it stays nice and tight. But look inside the muscle fascicle, there's a lot of other tubes. Pull one of those tubes out, this is a muscle fiber. And the muscle fiber is wrapped around with an endomysium so that way it's nice and wrapped up and put together. But you'll notice all the tubes inside the muscle fiber, you pull one out, that's a myofibril. If we look at a myofibril here, if we zoom in on it, this is what it looks like. Essentially here, you'll see things called actin and myosin, Z lines and sarcomeres. Essentially, these actin and myosin is what's going to create the contraction of a muscle. There is a YouTube video here, if you click here on the Google Slides, that will review the skeletal muscle structure if you need a little bit more of a visual aid in a video format. Now, on that myofibril, we have this section here. So I'm kind of just zooming into it to show you how a muscle contracts and relaxes. So let me briefly go back. So I'm looking at a myofibril. I pulled a myofibril out, and now I'm looking at a section of the myofibril. I'm just going to zoom in on it so it's a little bit more simple like this. What we see here in red is something we call the thin filaments, or called the actin, and in green, the thick filaments, or what we call myosin. What happens, you see these little circles on the green myosin filament? Essentially, those are called myosin heads. Heads, if you think of them like hands, they're a little bit more helpful. What happens is these myosin heads kind of reach up and grab the thin actin and bring it closer to the midline. And what happens is that these Z lines, which indicate a sarcomere, get closer together. A sarcomere is Z line to Z line. It's these vertical lines. Now notice how far apart these Z lines are in the top image. This is showing a relaxed sarcomere. So this is what your muscles look like relaxed. But when they're contracting and being used, these myosin heads reach up, grab the actin, and bring it closer to the middle. Notice how far the actin is overlapping the myosin now. Also notice how close the Z lines are closer towards the middle. In this case, this is a contraction of a muscle. So when a muscle is used, what's happening is we go from the top picture to the bottom picture when we're contracting a muscle. So if we're going to look at it in a moving format here, the pink is indicating the myosin, or the thick filament, and the purple is indicating the actin, or the thin filament. What's happening is these myosin heads kind of get cocked back and then reach up, grab actin, and then push it along. That's how the Z lines get closer together when a muscle contraction happens. These myosin heads reach up, bring the actin closer to the middle. Z lines get closer. This whole thing, Z line to Z line, is called a sarcomere. The sarcomere gets shorter when the muscle is contracting. So it kind of looks like this. There's a lot more other steps involved, but this is all what we need to know for now. There are two YouTube videos here to help you kind of understand the sarcomere contraction, or what we call the sliding filament theory, if you want to watch these YouTube videos. Again, the sliding filament theory is when the thin and thick filaments, the actin and the myosin, go ahead and slide towards the middle for muscle contraction. Now, talking about contractions, there's three different types of contractions that a muscle can do. They can perform an isometric contraction, a concentric contraction, and an eccentric contraction. Let's begin by using the bicep brachii as an example. Bicep brachii, I know we haven't gone over muscles yet, but it's something we're sort of familiar with, right? We know where our bicep is. Our bicep brachii is going to be found in the anterior aspect of our arm. The origin for the bicep brachii is going to be in this area here of your shoulder, your humerus scapula. And your insertion is going to be down here. It's going to be on your radius. Therefore, if it goes from your shoulder to your elbow, it crosses the anterior aspect of your elbow. That means the muscle does elbow flexion. Now, we're going to use that information to talk about contractions. We're going to go over each type of contraction individually. You can refer back to this slide on your own after. Let's start with an isometric contraction. An isometric contraction is a contraction with no movement. So like I just said, the bicep brachii starts in your shoulder at your humerus scapula and inserts on your radius of your forearm. If we want to isometrically contract a muscle, we want to squeeze it, but we don't want movement to occur. So how does that happen? An example of an isometric contraction using the bicep brachii is to hold a weight. So look at this for example. This is the bicep brachii. This is what it looks like with a no movement contraction. This person is not moving the dumbbell up or down. They're simply holding the dumbbell at 90 degrees elbow flexion. That means the bicep brachii is being used. Remember, the bicep brachii is flexing the elbow. So we have the elbow flex, but we're not moving it anymore. That would then be considered an isometric contraction for the bicep brachii. Another type of contraction is a concentric contraction. A concentric contraction is the muscle shortening while contracting. This is something you're probably already kind of familiar with. Again, if the bicep brachii starts in your shoulder and ends on your radius, what I'm saying in this case is a concentric contraction is when we shorten that muscle. And how do we shorten the muscle? We bring the insertion closer to the origin. So in this case, look at this individual now. He has the dumbbell, and now he's bringing the dumbbell up to his shoulder. So when the insertion moves closer to the origin, that's when the muscle is shortening or squeezing. That would be considered a concentric contraction because we're shortening while contracting. Another type of contraction is an eccentric contraction. An eccentric contraction is a muscle lengthening while contracting. Let's look at this for the bicep brachii. Again, the bicep brachii starts in the shoulder area, inserts on the forearm area. The bicep brachii does elbow flexion. But if we were to take a dumbbell and start it here at our shoulder and slowly go in the opposite direction, that would be considered an eccentric contraction. Why? If the bicep brachii does elbow flexion, how is slowly going into elbow extension an eccentric contraction for the bicep brachii? Well, it's because when you slowly lower the dumbbell from his shoulder to the floor, the bicep brachii muscle is slowly releasing. Therefore, it is working under tension, but it is working in a lengthened position. So if we look at types of contractions, the isometric contraction is a contraction, but there's no movement. So again, an example of this is holding the dumbbell with, let's say, 90 degrees of elbow flexion and not moving. You're using the bicep brachii, there's no movement, isometric contraction. Concentric contraction is a contraction while shortening. So how do we shorten the bicep brachii? You bring the insertion closer to the origin. And how do I do that? I bring the forearm closer to the shoulder. So when I bring the dumbbell up, it's a concentric contraction because I'm shortening the muscle while contracting. An eccentric contraction is a contraction while lengthening. So now the bicep brachii, notice it's lengthening, but how come it's still considered a contraction? Because when I go in the opposite direction in a controlled manner, this bicep brachii is slowly letting me go into elbow extension. Instead of just releasing me, it's still working, but in a lengthened position. To review types of contractions, there is a YouTube video here. Please watch this on your own. So let's just use a pull-up briefly to just talk about the three types of contractions. First, if we're doing a pull-up, this is more of a chin-up actually. If we're doing a chin-up, if we were to grab the bar, now we're going to look at the, let's say the bicep brachii. To keep it simple, okay? We're doing the bicep brachii. When we go up, we're going up towards that bar. We are concentrically contracting the bicep brachii, right? Because when we go up, we're flexing our elbows. We're shortening that muscle. Now, at the very top of that chin up, if we hold it there and we do not move, our bicep brachii, they're contracting isometrically because they're working, they're squeezing, but they're no longer moving. Lastly, when I go down from the chin up, I don't just drop, right? Because that's how we strain muscles. We slowly go down. And when we slowly go down, my bicep brachii is lengthening while contracting. So that is called an eccentric contraction. Now let's see if we're understanding what's happening here. When do the Z lines get closer together? Answer: the Z lines get closer together during muscle contraction. And why? Because of the sliding filament theory. These myosin heads, these little green dots on the myosin, reach up, grab the thin filaments called actin, bring them closer to the middle. That results in these Z lines getting closer together. Question: what type of quadricep muscle group contraction is occurring when you come up from a squat? Look at this little box below for more details. Answer: a concentric contraction of the quadricep muscle group is occurring when you come up from a squat. And that's because the action of the quadriceps muscle group is knee extension. Therefore, to concentrically contract the muscle group, you would have to do the same joint movement as the action. Going up from a squat would shorten the quadricep muscle group, which is what a concentric contraction is. Question. What type of quadricep muscle group contraction is occurring when you squat down? Please refer to the information in the corner here. Answer. An eccentric contraction of the quadricep muscle group is occurring when you squat down. And this is because the action of the quadricep muscle group, again, is knee extension. Therefore, to eccentrically contract the muscle group, you would slowly do the opposite of the joint movement of its action. Slowly going down in a squat would lengthen the quadricep muscle group, which is what an eccentric contraction is. Question. What type of quadricep muscle group contraction is occurring when you hold a squat? And please refer to the information in this box. Answer. An isometric contraction of the quadricep muscle group is occurring when you hold a squat. Again, this is because the action of the quadricep muscle group is knee extension. Therefore, to isometrically contract the muscle group, you would contract the muscle with no movement. Holding a squat will result in the quadricep muscle group contracting, but having no movement while holding that position. That does conclude our presentation. If you have any questions, please go back through the presentation. If you still have questions, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to help.